has come to our family. You remember our venerable house, opulent and imperial, gazing proudly from its stoic perch above the moor. I lived all my years in that ancient, rumor-shadowed manor, fattened by decadence and luxury. And yet I began to tire of conventional extravagance. Singular, unsettling tales suggested the mansion itself was a gateway to some fabulous and unnameable power. With relic and ritual, I bent every effort towards the excavation and recovery of those long-buried secrets, exhausting what remained of our family fortune on swarthy workmen and sturdy shovels. At last, in the salt-soaked crags beneath the lowest foundations, we unearthed that damnable portal of antediluvian evil. Our every step unsettled the ancient earth. But we were in a realm of death and madness. In the end, I alone fled laughing and wailing through those blackened arcades of antiquity, until consciousness failed me. You remember our venerable house, opulent and imperial. It is a festering abomination. I beg you, return home, claim your birthright, and deliver our family from the ravenous, clutching shadows of the darkest dungeon.
You will arrive along the old road. It winds with a troubling, serpent-like suggestion through the corrupted countryside, leading only, I fear, to ever more tenebrous places. There is a sickness in the ancient pitted cobbles of the old road, and on its writhing path you will face viciousness, violence, and perhaps other damnably transcendent terrors. So steel yourself, and remember there can be no bravery without madness. The old road will take you to hell, but in that gaping abyss, we will find our redemption. Mastery over life and death was chief among my early pursuits. I began in humility, but my ambition was limitless. Who could have divined the prophetic import of something as unremarkable as a twitch in the leg of a dead rat? I entertained a delegation of experts from overseas, eager to plumb the depths of their knowledge and share with them certain techniques and alchemical processes I had found to yield wondrous and terrifying results. Having learned all I could from my visiting guests, I murdered them as they slept. I brought my colleagues back with much of their intellect intact, a remarkable triumph for even the most experienced necromancer. Freed from the trappings of their humanity, they plied their terrible trade anew, the dead reviving the dead, on and on down the years, forever. A devil walks these halls. Only the mad or the desperate go in search of him. Towering, fierce, terrible, nightmare-made material. Death
concentration.
A time to perform beyond one's limits.
Devastating blow. A decisive pummeling. No living sinew to actuate them. Will these walking bones finally fail? Excavations beneath the manor were well underway when a particularly ragged indigent arrived in the hamlet. This filthy, toothless miscreant boasted an uncanny knowledge of my ambitions and prognosticated publicly that, left unchecked, I would soon unleash doom upon the world. This raving creature had to be silenced, but doing so proved maddeningly impossible. How had he survived the stockades, the icy waters, and the knives I delivered so enthusiastically into his back? How had he returned time and time again to rouse the townfolk with his wild speculations and prophecies? Finally, resigned to his uncommon corporeal resilience, I lured him to the dig. There, I showed him the thing and detailed the full extent of my plans. Triumphantly, I watched as he tore his eyes from their sockets and ran shrieking into the shadows, wailing maniacally that the end was upon us all. The echoes of his mindless tittering reverberate maddeningly. The madman hides there, behind the pews, spouting his mindless drivel.
is restored. Mortality clarified in a single strike. Dizzying blow to body and brain. Did he foresee his own demise? I care not, so long as he remains dead. I had collected many rare and elusive volumes on ancient herbal properties, and was set to enjoy several weeks immersed in comfortable study. My work was interrupted, however, by a singularly striking young woman who insisted on repeated calls to the house. Her knowledge of horticulturalism and its role in various arcane practices impressed me greatly. My licentious impulse gave way to a genuine professional respect, and together we began to plant, harvest, and brew. As time wore on, her wild policy of self-experimentation grew intolerable. She quaffed all manner of strange fungi, herbs, and concoctions, intent on gaining some insight into the horror we both knew to be growing beneath us. The change in her was appalling, and no longer able to stomach it, I sent her to live in the Weald, where her wildness would be welcomed. There is method in the wild corruption here. It bears a form both wretched and malevolent. Twisted and maniacal, a slathering testament to the powers of corruption. leave her corpse to rot, consumed by the spores she spawned. Foolish horrors, brought low and driven into the mud. Simple folk are by their nature loquacious, and the denizens of the hamlet were no exception. It was not long before rumors of my morbid genius and secretive excavations began to fuel local legend. In the face of my increasingly egregious flaunting of public taboos, awe turned to ire, and demonstrations were held in the town square. The wild whispers of heresy roused the rabble to violent action. Such was the general air of rebellion that even my generous offer of gold to the local constabulary was rebuffed. To reassert my rule, I sought out unscrupulous men skilled in the application of force. Tight-lipped and terrifying, these mercenaries brought with them a war machine of terrible implication. Eager to end the tiresome domestic distraction, I instructed my newly formed militia of hardened bandits, brigands, and killers to go forth and do their work. Compliance and order were restored, and the noisome population of the hamlet was culled to more manageable numbers. The smell of sulfur and gunpowder hangs in the air. The war machine is close. A marvel of technology, an engine of destruction. Injury, palpable fear. Brigands are undone. Our family crest is once again a symbol of strength. Be wary. Triumphant pride precipitates a dizzying fall. The ways and rituals of blood sacrifice are difficult to master.
Those from beyond require a physical vessel if they are to make the crossing into our reality. The timing of the chants is imperative. Without the proper utterances at precise intervals, the process can fail spectacularly. My first attempts at summoning were crude, and the results disappointing. I soon found, however, that the type and condition of the host's meat was a critical factor. The best results came from pigs, whose flesh is most like that of man. The great thing I had managed to bring through was brutish and stupid. Moreover, it required prodigious amounts of meat to sustain itself. But this was only a trifling concern. After all, I had a village full of it.
A nameless abomination. A testament to my failures. It must be destroyed. It is a travesty. A blundering mountain of hatred and rage. Decisive pummeling. Unnerved, unbalanced. A brilliant confluence of skill and purpose. Mortality clarified in a single strike. Is even more horrible in death. Liquefaction cannot come soon enough. Continue the onslaught. Destroy them all. My zeal for blood rituals and summoning rites had begun to ebb, as each attempt invariably brought only failure and disappointment. Progress was halting, and the rapidly accumulating surplus of wasted flesh had become
burdensome. I could not store such a prodigious amount of offal, nor could I rid myself of it easily, possessed as it was by unnameable things from outer spheres. When excavations beneath the manor broke through into an ancient network of aqueducts and tunnels, I knew I had found a solution to the problem of disposal. The spasmodically squirming, braying, and snorting half-corpses were heaped each upon the other until at last I was rid of them. The warrens had become a landfill of snout and hoof, gristle and bone, a mountainous, twitching mass of misshapen flesh fusing itself together in the darkness. The thing is more terrible than I can describe. An incoherent jumble of organ, sinew, and bone. Squirming, contorting, and ever-expanding. This horror must be unmade. Singular strike. Precision and power. The ground quakes. Devastating blow. Inspiration and improvement. It is as grotesque in death as it was in life. My lofty position wasn't always accompanied by the fear of office. And there was a time when I could walk the streets or raise a glass in the tavern without concern for molestation. Faithful as the tide, one precocious village waif made it her hobby to shadow my every errand. It was charming then, troublesome later. In financial desperation, I struck a bargain with the ancient things that surfaced in search of sacrifice when the moon was right. Their price was the delivery of an obscure idol and one other item of more troubling portent. The pact struck. My newfound accomplices slipped silently beneath the brackish water. A fearful stirring at the edge of the torchlight betrayed a familiar witness and gifted me with malign inspiration. Under the blood moon, I lured my wide-eyed prey to the pier's edge. Before she could properly appreciate her position,
I clamped on a manacle, chaining her to the leering idol. A small push was sufficient to send both into the icy waters. And when at length the tide receded, jewels of the most magnificent grandeur lay scattered upon the shore. I always wondered what became of the unfortunate little waif. The aquatic devils have remade the poor girl in their image. She is their queen and their slave. A devastating blow. Masterfully executed. Well struck. Seafaring trade, the lifeblood of any port, can resume again now that the routes are safe. Prying eyes had become a nuisance along the old road, and so I undertook to receive my most curious deliveries by way of marine shipments. A sheltered jetty was accessible by a narrow stone stair off the back of the manor, and a discreet system of pulleys could hoist even the heaviest prizes up the rock face from a securely tied dinghy below. I employed a crew of particularly unsavory mariners, who for a time sailed the four corners at my behest, retrieving many valuable artifacts, relics, and rare texts. Predictably, they increased their tariffs to counter my intense stipulations of secrecy. Such resources had long been exhausted, of course, and so I prepared an alternative payment. While the greedy dogs slept off their revelry, I hexed their anchor with every twisted incantation I could muster, imbuing it with the weight of my ambition and my contempt for their crude extortion. At the witching hour, the anchor pulled with preternatural force, dragging craft and crew down into the depths. They must have cried out, but no sound escaped the swirling black waters. The poor devils, chained and drowning for eternity. Even in death, the captain shouts his orders, and the crew obeys. falls, a faint hope blossoms. A decisive pummeling. Powerful blow. Confidence surges as the enemy crumbles. Well struck. To float forever, deep in the swirling blackness, far beyond the light's reach. The sparkling eyes of youth, twisted and made merciless. Inspiration and improvement. Confluence of skill and purpose.
predator is often blind to its own peril. Behold the infinite malignity of the stars. Compassion is a rarity in the fevered pitch of battle. A dizzying blow to body and brain. To perform beyond one's limits. Blurred vision. The end approaches.
wounds of war can be healed, but never hidden. Waits for the slightest lapse in concentration. Such a terrible assault cannot be left unanswered. Injury and despondence set the stage for heroism or cowardice. Teetering on the brink, facing the abyss. True test. Hold fast or expire. Adversity can foster hope and resilience. Perched at the very precipice of oblivion. Patched up, if only to bleed again. Many fall in the face of chaos, but not this one. Not today. Foolish horrors, brought low and driven into the mud. The ground quakes.
decisive pummeling. The bigger the beast, the greater the glory. And now the true test. Hold fast or expire. A trifling victory, but a victory nonetheless. Masterfully executed. Such a terrible assault cannot be left unanswered. Their formation is broken. Maintain the offensive. A trifling victory, but a victory nonetheless.
The abyss returns even the boldest gaze.
The contest begins. cursed champion falls.
The bigger the beast, the greater the glory. A shuddering, crystalline bulk.
Masterfully executed. Another one falls.
The wounds of war can be healed, but never hidden.
Powerful blow.
Executed with impunity. Another abomination cleansed from our lands. Press this advantage. Give them no quarter. Blight had struck the harvest again that year, and the miller was desperate. He came to me, hat clutched tightly in filthy fingers, stinking of sweat and manure. Seated comfortably in my observatory, surrounded by telescopes and other delicate apparatus, I recognized his misfortune as an opportunity, and I agreed to lend him my expertise. Slabs etched with certain celestial designs were erected around the perimeter of the farmstead. The miller, lamentably eager for some early sign of improvement, fixed his watery eyes intently upon the wilted fields and listless mill. My gaze, however, was cast skyward, and I marveled at the limitless profanity of the stars, wondering what harvest might come. The poor miller, thrice a victim. The seasons took his livelihood. I took his land. And now, uncountable years later, the comet has taken his humanity. My only regret is that I did not live to see that shoddy mill smashed to pieces by the miraculous bounty I reaped from beyond the void. A lifetime of pious toil, an eternity of suffering. Dizzying blow to body and brain. Upon the dirt he harrowed so fruitlessly. The star-spawned horror rattles its crystalline cage.
soothed, sedated. The wounds of war can be healed, but never hidden. Injury, palpable fear. It will live again in another time, another place. Mortality clarified in a single strike. Powerful blow.
vision and power.
Festering fear consumes the mind. Returns even the boldest gaze. Confidence surges as the enemy crumbles. Death waits for the slightest lapse in concentration. quakes.
A time to perform beyond one's limits. Gnawing uncertainty, the birthplace of dread. The blood quickens. Ringing ears, blurred vision. The end approaches. Devastating blow. Becoming unwound. Disadvantage. Give them no quarter. Is lit. The path is clear. You require only the strength to follow it. Time to perform beyond one's limits.
Impressive.
Clarified in a single strike. Devastating blow. Singular strike. Confidence surges as the enemy crumbles.
Masterfully executed.
Soothed. Sedated.
Continue the onslaught. Destroy them all. Foolish horrors, brought low and driven into the mud. The fiend falls, a faint hope blossoms. Confidence surges as the enemy crumbles. Masterfully executed. Decisive pummeling. Precision and power. A time to perform beyond one's limits. Inspiration and improvement. Compassion is a rarity in the fevered pitch of battle. Brilliant confluence of skill and purpose. Unnerved, unbalanced. The blood quickens. Impressive.
dizzying blow to body and brain. Compassion is a rarity in the fevered pitch of battle. A powerful blow. Cursed champion falls.
A trifling victory, but a victory nonetheless.